All right, check 1, 2, 3. Check 1, 2, 3. Good morning to everybody. Hope you guys are doing well. So, what I thought I would do this morning is just take a little time to respond to some of the comments that are made on here. I'm a rather wordy fellow. I like to talk a lot, so typing all that out is not exactly simple. So it's a little bit easier if I would just go through the comments and kind of speak to them as they come up. So, by the way, those of you who are arriving, good morning. Happy Saturday, September 12th to each of you. So, what I've done this morning is I've kind of gone back through my comments, I'd say over the last couple weeks, and just wanted to kind of find some of the comments that I'd like to respond to. I'm going to be honest with you. Some of the comments are, what's the word I'm looking for? Enormous. And I'm not going to try to answer those. I feel like sometimes people are writing a Bible study in the comment, and I'm not going to respond to that. Can everybody hear me okay? Good morning. Deanna, you can hear me okay? I would just hate to be talking this whole time and the mic not actually be on. Okay, great. All right. So, again, I'm going to go back a little bit and find some comments that I'd like to respond to. So give me one moment here. All right, so I'm basically at around the 2-week mark of notifications, and I'm now just moving forward. So there was one or two that I saw that I thought I wanted to speak to. So I will do that here in just one moment. You'll forgive me because I'm getting different. I get different comments from or different notifications from different YouTubers that I follow. And so I'm having to move through all those to find the right one. So here's one. This is based upon a comment or based upon a video when Adventists bring up Matthew 24:20. And where is the comment here? It's like when I chose it and then go into it. All right, so this is one from Lenora about 3 weeks ago on that video when Adventists bring up Matthew 24:20. So she wrote, "Hi Scott, can you sometime cover the topic of the Adventist and wearing of jewelry? Also, is holding a crusade a mode of operation to gather more followers?" So Lenora, I chuckle because these are two huge topics. So I will try to be as concise with them as I can. So the topic of Adventists and the wearing of jewelry. So Adventists are absolutely opposed to the wearing of jewelry. It is in their it's in their baptismal vows. Mrs. White wrote about this a lot. I can remember as an Adventist, even struggling, listen to me now, struggling with the idea of whether or not my wife and I, when we got married as Adventists, would wear wedding bands. Because if memory serves, Mrs. White wrote that it was not a good idea. I think the one kind of grace she would give the wearing of wedding bands was it was either or. It was nurses or those in the medical profession, or call porters, as she would call them, or evangelists, because they were so out in public. For them to wear wedding bands would have been okay, but she really did try to counsel against it. Adventists will often, and I don't know the actual book and chapter and verse, but when they would like to quote about a woman's beauty should come from the inward, not from the outward adornment. And they talked about jewelry, and I think it was braiding the jewelry through the hair. That's fine. Two things can be true at the same time. It's true. It's true that a person's beauty should come from the outside, but it doesn't also mean that they can't also add or wear jewelry. There's no reason that they couldn't do that. I can absolutely positively think of no. I can think of no scripture that explicitly states that it is sinful or it is ungodly to wear jewelry. Cannot see that at all. What you have to do, what I like to talk about, is you have to be living by certain principles. I think it would be ungodly that your family is going hungry, but you have on a $6,000 Rolex. Your family is in trouble, or people close to you are in dire need, but you're going around wearing a lot of jewelry that's worth a lot of value. There's a principle there that I think you're absolutely missing. But we want to say things like jewelry is wrong, but I'll wear Ralph Lauren or designer clothing, and that's okay because it's not jewelry. This is very slippery, very tricky, very, I don't know. It reminds me of the Pharisees that Jesus was so against, is that they find these loopholes. Well, it's not actually jewelry, so you're missing the principle, I think, behind it. Also, Lenora was asking, is holding a crusades a mode of operation to gather more followers? It absolutely is. This is well documented, and Adventists will very often, when they start going into their town, when they decide they're going to do their Daniel and Revelation seminar, they will make sure that in the brochures, in the mailings, that there is absolutely, positively nothing in there to indicate their religious bent. I have witnessed this firsthand. As an ordained elder myself at the time, who played a heavy part in those series and those crusades, we did everything in our power. One, not to show our hand. That's how I'm going to describe it. You don't show your hand too early. The idea being, if they know ahead of time that you are an Adventist, they've either had interaction with Adventists before, they know pretty well what the Adventists believe, or our concern at the time was, well, they're going to talk to their pastor, and their pastor will speak negatively of us, and so they won't come and hear the truth. Those are absolutely the angles. And I think the part that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way, I always felt like it was, I just always felt like it was being not insincere, but dishonest by omission. And I always hated the fact that during those first series, every single time I can remember people in the congregation coming to the evangelist or to myself and going, well, what denomination are you guys? And we always had like this pat answer, and that is, well, listen, if we tell you that, blah, 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 we promise you we will tell you. We promise, but we just want you to continue to hear the story, because Adventists know, just as we knew, if they have the answer that we're Seventh-day Adventists, they will bolt. And they did. Okay. So Adventists are right in trying to hide that, but they immediately try to get out. Another thing I'll say is, for the most part, the people who are being attracted to these seminars, the people that are responding positively to these seminars, are people who are churched. There are some that are churched, but as far as their biblical, what's the word I'm looking for? Literacy, it's not very high. What I'll say to you is, it's not like you see a number of people who have their masters in theology there. It's not like you have pastors from other denominations that are there, that are being swayed into it. That's not what you see. You majorly have people. I'm not saying they're unchurched, but I'm saying that they are biblically illiterate. A biblically illiterate person, and this is going to sound crazy to you. It's going to sound crazy to you, but they will fall for This is what the Bible says. Now, in your gut, you're like, so what do you mean? Like, it's illiterate to go with, this is what the Bible says. Well, I can show you verses that if you take them out of their context, we need to run right down and stone some people for adultery. Okay, because the Bible says it. You have to be able to take it in its context. And so during a lot of these seminars, there's a lot of proof texting, which is meaning we're not reading the text in its context. We're reading the text alone. And then what we're doing is we're accompanying it to a number of other texts from all over the Bible to present this volume. See? But in the reality is you're taking them all out of their context to, you have your own narrative that you're trying to push. To those who are biblically illiterate, they don't understand this concept. They don't understand this trick. And so they go along with it. They absolutely go along with it. That being said, one thing I will tell you, and I would love to hear Adventists refute this, what's really important is not to see how many baptisms they have. It's not important to see how many baptisms they have at the end of this week or maybe month-long series. What's important is to come back a year later. Come back a year later and see how many are still there. That's the telltale sign. So it is deceptive and dishonest and not, it's really despicable. It's really despicable. So, Lenora, thanks for that question, and I hope I answered that for you. Let's move along here. Let's see here. And I can't answer every comment that's in here, so I'm not even going to try. But we're moving along. Let's move along here. Thank you guys for your patience. Oh, here's one that I was looking at a while ago. So this was 1 week ago. This is a comment that was posted in my video, What Was Nailed to the Cross? What was nailed to the cross? The commenter's name is Daniel Israel. It comes from 1 week ago. So Daniel writes, first of all, the Sabbath is established from the beginning before Moses. In the 10 Commandments, don't mention circumcised. So don't use circumcised as excuse to get away from the Sabbath. When Jesus told disciples about the future, what going to take place, this is exactly how it's written. I'm not misreading it. I'm reading it exactly how it's written, which is common because sometimes English isn't their primary language, and so they don't write exactly the way that we write or speak the way we speak. Let me turn Alexa off before she starts listening in. Daniel goes on to write, when Jesus told disciples about the future, what going to take place, and we going have fight and struggle, we say Matthew 24:24, but pray ye that your flight not be in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. This mean Jesus giving how important is the Sabbath. I'm going to come back and address these issues, but I'm going to kind of read the whole comment, and then we'll come back and address the points. When people reject the Sabbath, you're rejecting what is holy. When people reject the Sabbath, you don't care what God created. Satan hates the Sabbath, according to Revelation chapter 12:17. Colossians 2, don't say not to keep Sabbath. On verse 16 is mean, I not let anyone judge me because I'm keeping the Sabbath. Great. All right. So let's go ahead and break down this comment. So Daniel writes, first of all, Sabbath is established from the beginning before Moses. Sabbath is established from the beginning before Moses. So this is a common, terribly common argument that is made from probably not only Adventists, but even Sabbatarians. But when you talk about Sabbatarians, the largest group of Sabbatarians are the Seventh-day Adventists. And this is one that they make all the time. Now, the reason they want to make, or let me rephrase that, the reason they need this argument is when, rightly so, when as Christians, we say that the law was nailed to the cross. So they then want to say, fine. The law But the Sabbath, they want to argue, is different because it was established at the beginning. It was before Moses. So this is a very, very, as I said, a very, very common argument that is made. Let's start with their perspective that it was established before Moses. The Bible says, if we go back to the account of Genesis, that God created these things, boom, 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 boom. No argument with that. No argument with that at all. But what Daniel and any Sabbatarian needs to acknowledge, and if they're being honest, they will, that the term Sabbath never appears in the Bible until Exodus, I believe, Exodus 15. Exodus 15. Okay. So the Bible writers never mention the Sabbath prior to then. Okay. Additionally, let's think about something for a moment. When do we have the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy? When do we have those written? Are those written at the time of Genesis? Oh, no. Those are written many, many years after. And I'm not trying to get into the issue of who is it that wrote those books, but I'm more talking about when were those books written? And I think that it's important to note that the writer or the writers, because there is some controversy or question there, but the writer or the writers of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy was fully aware of the oral tradition of what was happening at creation, what was happening in the life of Abraham, what was happening in the life of the patriarchs. So I would have zero argument had the writer of those books simply stated, and Adam and Eve kept the Sabbath, or the Sabbath was established there, or Abraham on the Sabbath day, or Abraham blah, 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 blah. I could have no argument, but that's not what the biblical writer documents. The biblical writer, inspired by God, I fully believe that, simply says, finally, in Exodus 15, that I think the writing is somewhere along the lines of, and I guess I probably should open up the Bible and look at it here. It shouldn't be hard to find. So Exodus, let's take a look here where it was. Exodus 15. No, it's not there. Well, at least if it is. I'm seeing 16. Maybe that was it. Exodus 16, basically verse 24. He said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left lay over aside and be kept until the morning." That, I believe, is the very first instance of the word Sabbath in all the Bible. So first off, Daniel, you're on shaky ground right there when you're saying that it was established from the beginning, especially when you see that the Sabbath commandment listed in Exodus 20, the first time we're seeing the term Sabbath is only 4 chapters before. So it's hard to establish it in that way. Now, there's no arguing that if you look at Exodus chapter 6, Exodus 20, verse 8, this is what it says. "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall do your labor and all your work. For the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you, your maidservant," blah, blah, blah. And then verse 11 says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth and all that was in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the 7th day and made it holy." Okay. Not going to argue that. That is clear scripture. I am not going to argue that. But we have to take a look at what this verse is saying. So the commandment is saying, hey, Israelites, who most likely have not ever kept a Sabbath, have never kept a Sabbath before in their life, it would stand to reason that only a few days, weeks before, whenever Exodus 16 happened chronologically, that for the first time is they're getting this idea of stopping work and it's going to be a holy day. Okay. And now here in Exodus 20, he's letting them know from now on, every 7th day, you're going to be stopping work. You're not going to do anything. Now, we could get into what that would do to the psyche. What is the spiritual idea that God is trying to lay to them? Okay, we could do that. let's think. Maybe we should indulge in that a little bit. The Passover. The Passover was something that was carried on forever. The Passover goes back to a specific night when Egypt still had control of the Israelites, and Moses is trying to pull them out. Pharaoh is allowing it, and then he's not. He's allowing it, and then he's not. And the plagues are coming in through. Pharaoh is saying, "Okay, you can take them, and then you can't." He's moving back and forth, and then finally, the final one was saying, "Listen, he's going to come through. God is going to come through the angel of death, and any home that there is not blood of the lamb over the doorpost to represent this home, if that blood is not on the death over the doorpost, the firstborn will die, and the firstborn of the livestock, it's all going to die." And so the Israelites went ahead and did that. They took the blood of that lamb, they put it over. Oh, and so that night when the angel of death came through, it passed over every house. Did that happen? Yes, it did. It absolutely did. Something amazing happened that night, and that thing pointed forward to something. That thing that occurred there pointed forward to something. It pointed forward to Christ. When we, through faith in the blood of the Lamb, Jesus Christ, when that blood covers our heart, that death covers us. All right, the death that will come from sin, the eternal death that passes over us. And so the Jews from then on were to continue to obey and to keep that Passover, to remember that night what had legitimately happened, but also to going forward to always remember looking forward. So it is a literal remembrance of something that did physically happen, an event that did occur, but we are taking this physical thing of putting blood over it, over the physical doorpost, and the angel of death passing over those homes. And we're seeing now the spiritual import, and that is when we, by faith, believe in the blood of Christ, death will pass over us as well. It's looking back, it's looking forward. Now, here in this case, you have the Israelites also now having their attention taken back to the seventh day of creation, when God had finished all of his creation and he rested from his work. Okay. And so in Exodus 20, he's saying now once a week, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to stop laboring. You're going to stop doing that. And you're going to go ahead and you're going to keep that day holy. So let's kind of compare it now to the Passover. Did God, in fact, rest from his work on the seventh day? Yes, absolutely did. We can head back to Genesis chapter, let's see here. Genesis chapter 2, it says, the seventh day God rests. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because God rested from all of his work that he had done in creation. That's it. That's all that it says. It does not include, it doesn't say that Adam and Eve rested from their work. It does not say that God instructed them to continue to keep the Sabbath. It doesn't say anything like that at all. Now, this next argument that I'm going to make is not one that I can support with scripture to prove it. What I would say is, I think that it's more of a logical type of an argument, and that would be this. What else was there to do? I like to look at this story and that creation week, those 7 days, and God saying at the very end, that's it. Enjoy. Like it's as if we are building a house. We're building a house, and we start off by laying this, and then we build this, and then we add that, and we add that. And then finally, all right, I can step back after looking at what I've done. Like, all right. And the thing is, I'm not building it for me. I'm not building it for me. I'm building it for someone else. And finally, they now come up and like, there you go. I am done. The work is entirely done, and it's for you. You had no part to play whatsoever, but I'm just now going to rest in this. Okay. Now, here's an interesting thing. Again, again, um, I have no scriptural support for this argument that I'm going, or this point that I'm going to contend to you. Okay. But it comes from the belief, it comes from this first fact that I mentioned a while ago. When was the book of Genesis written? At the time of the creation? No, it was written hundreds of years later with a look back on the oral history. I do believe that the Bible was written under the inspiration of God, but for some reason, and if you don't believe me, please feel free to take a look. But for some reason, as you look back in Genesis chapter 1, an interesting writer's thing occurs. Please let me show you what it is, and we'll pick up, for instance, what day. I'd rather pick up late in the week, but you can find this writing technique all the way through. Let me see here. Here we go. So we're picking up now, basically at the end of the 5th day. It says in Genesis 1:22, and God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas, let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning the 5th day. Now, the point I'm wanting to drive to you is about this thing of there was evening and there was morning the 5th day. If you look at Genesis 1:19, and God saw that all was good, and there was evening and there was morning the 4th day. And then there was evening and morning, there was the 5th day. And he moves now, and God said, then let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kind. He now starts moving through here. And finally, he gets down here to at the very end of Genesis chapter 1, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the 6th day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts in them. And on the 7th day, God rested. What's your point, Scott? Well, I'm doing that thing where I'm arguing from silence. Now, generally speaking, arguing from silence, not a good idea. What do you mean? To say, I think Abraham had a TV. I think Abraham watched American Idol. Well, how do you prove that? It doesn't say that in the Bible. Well, it doesn't say that it doesn't say that he didn't do it. Now, that exact argument is not one that's made, but arguments like it are often made by Adventists. I've heard it with my own ears. I'll give you a great example. It was with Ellen White. And Ellen's White argument that she saw Moses or Enoch, or she saw somebody on another planet. Okay. And the argument is, well, you can't prove that that's not the case. You can't prove. Okay. So in regards to this comment about this, what I'm saying to you is, when I logically look at it, I'm trying to understand, listen, why on the 7th day did God not say, and there was evening and there was morning the 7th day? I'm not arguing this. I'm not saying this is an absolute. I just find it ironic. I find it odd that every other day of the creation week, it says there was evening and morning, boom, that's the end. Listen to me. That's the end of that day and the beginning of the next. It would appear to me that what we see here in Genesis and God resting is God stayed, God remained in a state of rest. Because what else was there to do? Everything was complete. And now what could happen is he can live at rest. There's nothing else to do. There's nothing else to create. There's also nothing else to, hear me now, there's nothing else to fix. He has created something totally without error, without problem. But if you think forward, there did come a moment when all of a sudden God did have to go back to work. Because he's resting here. But if you think about the Gospels, Jesus himself says, the Father is working to this day, and so am I. I would contend that God and man and earth was in a state of Sabbath rest, Sabbath-like rest. They were resting. There was nothing to do or fix until sin entered. Think about this also. When he does sin, and I don't know exactly where the verse is, and I don't want to take the time to find it, but it says that Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden, and all of a sudden they had to start working the earth. The earth then became broken, and all of a sudden the earth needed worked. Okay? So let's look at Daniel's comment here about establishing it from the beginning. Well, clearly God rested, and I would contend that all earth and all Adam and Eve, everyone was in rest. They were in a relationship with God. It was a good time, and until sin entered the world, God and the world stayed at rest. Once sin occurred, all of a sudden that rest ended, and work began not only for man but for God as well. Now, let's think about the Israelites. Because as I said, we talked about the Passover. The Passover was a literal thing that occurred, but so the Israelites from that moment forward were to remember literally what happened, but also to look forward to what will occur. It is a spiritual idea. So how do we look at the Sabbath? How are the Israelites to look and remember it and also be looking forward? Well, think about this, because this is, I think, the spiritual import. The spiritual import is Jesus Christ is the one who is to give us and provide us our rest. So what he's saying here is that you're going to work every day. That work is not ending. You're never going to have the continual, listen to me, you're not going to have the continual rest. What's going to happen is once a week, you're going to taste the type of Sabbath that was experienced in Genesis. See, I don't believe that it was a one day rest. No. I believe that once creation was over, they were living in what was intended to be a continual rest. God's rest from what he had done. For Adam and Eve, they're just living. They're just experiencing. They're involved with God. They're having a relationship with God. They're having a relationship with each other. They're having a relationship with animals, with earth. It is perfection is what God wanted, and it was going to continue until sin entered the world. The Israelites are being told, you're going to be able to taste that, and you're going to like it, but it's going to be short. It's going to be for one day, and then the next day you're going to go right back to your work. But you'll always be thinking, man, I look forward to the time when we can enter that continual rest. Now, here's what I'm going to say to you. To the Israelites, it was a looking forward to the physical rest. But remember something. Do you think God was sweating? You think God was sweating? I don't think God was sweating during creation. I don't think that it was strenuous work for God. But for man, it has been strenuous work, physical strenuous work. And so I think that there's kind of two ways that we see that rest that we're looking forward to by the physical rest that we experience. We look forward to the physical rest, yes, but we look forward to the spiritual rest. Well, what kind of rest? People, I think, are working for their salvation. People are working for their salvation. And so what I think another benefit of the Sabbath is God did it all. So now you can rest. You don't need to do this anymore. Okay, you don't need to do this anymore. It's been done for you. So for me, and you guys forgive me, I have ADHD. And so when comments come in, even though I'm talking, I'm thinking about what is written there. So I'm going to try to ignore any of the comments that are there for now and focus solely on the point at hand. And that is, I do believe that the seventh-day Sabbath given to the Israelites in Exodus 20 is absolutely looking back at the rest that God partook in. Okay. And I believe that when he made that holy, it was a very holy, godly time. And I do believe that he and man and earth all lived in that holy, godly time. But that holiness was broken when sin entered the picture. So I do believe that the commandment is to direct the Israelites back to that. Remember that kind of thing that we had there, but it was not It was absolutely not something that was mandated to man. If it was, show me the verse that proves that. Now, do not just run over to Abraham. Do not run over to Abraham. What is that verse? Because somebody was quoting that to me a little while ago. I believe it's Genesis 26:5. That's it. That he kept the commandments of God. Remember, my friends, when was the book of Genesis written? It was written well after that. So the writer is pointing out that when it says the commandments, it is a total presumption or assumption, not sure which it is. But I do not think that there's any biblical support for the idea that Abraham was keeping the Sabbath. Was he obeying God's commands and his laws? Yeah. Whatever laws and commands that God gave him, he was keeping them. When God commanded him that he go over here, he went over there. When he commanded him to offer his son as a sacrifice, he was heading on that path to do that. But for you and I or for anyone to go, these commandments over here in Exodus 20, those are the ones you were keeping. No, and you should be ashamed that you're trying to make such an argument. The most you can do is argue that Abraham was obedient. Whatever it was, he was obedient to it. But to try to import into that verse specifically what laws he was keeping, inaccurate, dangerous, not good hermeneutics. I think that's the right word, meaning biblical interpretation and application. Not good human, whatever the word is. It's not good to import something that is not explicitly there. So in answer to the question that was the Sabbath there from the beginning, no, I find zero biblical support for that. Let's move on in Daniel's statement here. The Ten Commandments don't mention circumcise, so don't use circumcise. Okay, so now this point right here is one that actually is echoed. There's another comment. I can't remember the person's name, so I apologize to that person right now. But they talked about, or they were asking a question that I had asked some time ago, and that is, so why then, if the Sabbath was temporary, why is it in the Ten Commandments? Why is it in the Ten Commandments? So my answer to you is this. And this is an answer I've provided on other videos on this channel, so you've seen it perhaps before, but in case you haven't, I'll answer it one more time. It starts off actually here. So if you're interested in a good book, I highly recommend this one to you. I think this is inverted, but this is called Discovering the New Covenant, Why I Am No Longer a Seventh-day Adventist by a pastor named Greg Taylor. He was an Adventist pastor. When I was in the academy in Mount Vernon, Ohio, Greg actually came and actually gave a week of prayer there. So I knew Greg Taylor. I also remember the document that when he left the Adventist church, it was a very troubling time. He had basically written up a huge theses on why he was leaving, providing biblical arguments as to why he was leaving, and he presented it, and it made its way around the Ohio Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, and it caused no short amount of controversy. I remember reading it myself and being opposed to it. I remember being sent to, I'd already graduated Mount Vernon Academy at that time, but I remember being sent down to Mount Vernon Academy. Was that it may not have been him, but I was sent to Mount Vernon Academy, requested to do a help with a week of prayer there because it wasn't Greg Taylor. I was sent there to handle another fire that was sent out by a Bible teacher that was at Mount Vernon Academy that ended up saying the Sabbath was fulfilled, and he got fired or left or whatever. And so I was sent to put out that fire. Nonetheless, back to here. At the time that Greg Taylor wrote his theses and I read it, I was Johnny Adventist and I would have nothing to do with it. But when I left Adventism, as I always say, as God opened my eyes, all of a sudden I I started asking questions, and I reached out to Greg Taylor, and I've talked to him a number of times since then, but I reached out to him because I said, I need to ask you some questions. And so he was gracious enough to give me a call back, and we talked on the phone. And one of the questions I asked him on the phone that day was this very question. Why, if the Sabbath was temporary, why put it in the Ten Commandments? Now, what you have to understand first before we can answer that question is, why is that an issue for me? For an Adventist, why is it an issue? Why would he put, if it's temporary, and here's the listen, if it's temporary, why would he put it in the Ten Commandments? Really, what the question is asking is, if it's ceremonial, why put it in the Ten Commandments? Which then, let's dig back a little bit farther. It comes from the perspective of the Adventists have always been taught and I'll say this incorrectly, they've been taught and they have always believed that the Ten Commandments are moral. Now, if you ask them, why is it moral? Their answer is because it's in stone, because it's in the Ten Commandments. That's what makes it moral. That's the end of the argument. That is the absolute end of the argument. It's moral because it's in the Ten Commandments, and it's a weak, it's a faulty, it's a terrible argument that because God wrote it in, because He did that. Listen, every command God gives is from God. All right, but not every command that He gives is moral. To simply put it in the Ten Commandments is not. But that's the place that it's coming from. When the Adventist argues this, that's what they're getting at. So he says, I asked him this. I said, why is that? And he says, and I think it's either he or I actually kind of developed this perspective. And basically what he said was this: the Ten Commandments are basically an idea. They are very much like principle. They are very much principles. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not covet. And remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But what he said was, they ultimately, on their own, and this is going to blow people's mind, they're insufficient to a point. And here's what I mean when I say they're insufficient. There's nothing flawed about them. There's nothing wrong with them. Thou shalt not kill. What do you mean it's insufficient? Well, it's insufficient because, so therefore what you're saying is, I can do everything but kill them, and I haven't committed a sin. And that's exactly what people did. You see, here's actually what has to happen. You start, like when they asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And he said, and he answered, love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. He said, these are the two greatest commandments. And then he said, all the law and the prophets hang on these two. Okay? So the way I think about it is, these are the two great truths. And somebody argued, because when I said these are principles, they said, no, they asked about the commandment, and it's a commandment. Go ahead. If the word commandment makes you feel better, you run along with that. All I'm telling you is the idea of loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, while it was commanded, it is a principle. And the reason I say it's a principle is, so what does that look like? You see, thou shalt not kill is more than just a principle, because it clearly is saying you will not perform this act. Okay? Love the Lord your God. What does that look like? What does it look like to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul? What does it look like to love your neighbor as yourself? And so when he says, these are the two greatest ones, and all the law and all the prophets hang on these two, it means they're all dependent upon these two principles. And as we start, what's the word I'm looking for? As we start expanding these out, you then look at the Ten Commandments. And what are the Ten Commandments but further expanding these two principles? Okay, you have the first four commandments, which is generally accepted, is the first four commandments are about how we show our love for God. Okay, These are principles slash commandments that expand that. And the other 6 are expansions of loving your neighbor as yourself. But here's the problem. They are not fully teased out. That's the word I was looking for. They're not fully teased out. We haven't finished it because, as I said, the commandment says, thou shalt not kill. So I can cut off his arms, cut off his legs, and keep him on life support. I haven't sinned against him. No. And so this is where we enter now the rest of the law. Remember, there's over 600 laws. It's not just the 10 commandments, but there's over 600 laws that were given from God to the Israelites. And in those were things like about how they're supposed to plow their fields, the times of year they're supposed to plow their fields. There's in there talking about if you do this to a man and if you take his right eye, you should give up your right eye. If you take his life, your life should be forfeit. If a woman is pregnant, now this is always one that we think about. If there's a woman who's pregnant and 2 men are fighting and they strike her and she loses the child, the man should forfeit his life. Okay, so there's all these things that go above and beyond thou shalt not kill. This is what I mean when I said the commandments were to a point insufficient or incomplete. Okay, so when I say to him, why is the Sabbath in there? He's basically saying, and I fully agree with this. In the 10 commandments, you are now presented with the most frequently celebrated ceremonial holy day of all. So, for instance, if you and I go to Leviticus, I believe it's Leviticus 23, or is it 13? That's Leviticus 13 is about leprosy. Here it is, Leviticus 23. It is the feasts of the Lord. The 23 verse 1, Leviticus 23, 1, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the Lord of Israel and say to them, these are the appointed feast days that you shall proclaim as holy convocations. They are my appointed feasts. The first one in verse 3, the Sabbath. 6 days six days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is the Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwelling places. Then he goes on to the next one. What is it? The Passover. These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, the holy convocations which you shall proclaim at the time appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day, on the month of the month at twilight is the Lord's Passover. Why then is the Sabbath in the 10 commandments? Well, for one thing, it's all part of the covenant. These are the terms of the covenant. And the Sabbath itself was a sign of the covenant. Remember, when Abraham had a covenant with God, what was the sign of that covenant? Circumcision. Circumcision was the sign of that covenant, right? And now he's saying the sign of this covenant I'm making with you, Israel, is that you keep the Sabbath. You're not going to do work on that day. You can work every other day, but you're not going to work on that day. I find it interesting that once the Sabbath was given, the Israelites realized something relatively quickly. You know, they'd had this sign of the covenant with Abraham, circumcision, that you and I all know that had to occur on male children on the 8th day of their life. And so they immediately said, hold on, whoa. What if the child's 8th day of life is on the 7th day of the week? Because they did understand rightly that to perform that work of circumcision would be work, and it would be breaking that commandment. So they're torn. What do we do? Which is greater? Listen to me. Which is greater? Think about this for a second. Which is greater? Which covenant should we follow here? Do we break the Sabbath to keep the covenant with Abraham, or if it falls on the 8th day, we move it over to Sunday? And the final answer was no. You circumcise the child. This indicates that the covenant with Abraham was still greater than the covenant with the children of Israel and keeping the Sabbath. Okay, so I'm moving along here, and I'm trying not to get distracted. I don't have any notes. This is all free form. So, ultimately, what am I driving at here? I'm driving at The Sabbath was in the Ten Commandments because it is the principle. It's the sign of the covenant, but it's also the principle. It is the most commonly reoccurring of all the ceremonial holy days. Now, one thing that Adventists love to say, and I can't tell you how crazy it makes me every time I hear them say it. Because if you want to talk about an unbiblical or a ridiculous or a weak argument, it's this one. There's actually two that they always say. Oh, this drives me nuts. They always say this, ready? And I know you've all heard it. Somehow the only commandment people want to forget is the one that God said, remember. I'm sorry for that. It drives me absolutely crazy because it's a totally unbiblical argument. And it carries no weight. It carries absolutely no weight. Here's the other one that they argue, and it was brought to me just within the last 2 weeks. It means something because it was etched in stone. It means something because it was etched in stone. Well, one thing that I've kicked around in retort to this, one thing I've kicked around in my head, I've not studied it out fully, I've not thought about it greatly, but this is the point I want to make to you. Let's go back chronologically and think about the giving of the law. Let's go back chronologically and think about the giving of the law. Chronologically, what happened? The Israelites were slaves for 400 years. They are finally exited out by Moses and God. They're led through the wilderness for 40 years. Fine. At some point in time, though, the law is given. And the chronological order of that was God, days, weeks, month beforehand, had told them about the Sabbath, that they weren't supposed to do any work. Manna came down from heaven, all that kind of stuff. But he says to he says to Moses, tell the people to come around the mountain. I'm going to talk to them. But do not have them come up on the mountain. They put a rope around it to stop the people from going to the mountain lest they should die. Listen to what I'm going to say to you. Exodus chapter 20. An important thing I think that we miss a lot of the times is this. Listen, Exodus 20, verse 1. And God spoke all of these words, saying, when we see Exodus chapter 20, Exodus 20, verse 8, we see God first speaking it. And then what I find ironic, what I find crazy, is the very last couple of sentences of Exodus chapter 20 says, now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off and said to Moses, you speak to us and we'll listen, but do not let God speak to us lest we die. Moses said to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. The people stood far back while Moses drew near to the thick. Listen to me. I'm just going to ask this question. Was it ever God's intention to write it? Was it ever God's intention that he write it? Guys, you have to give me 1 second. I'm going to come back on here, but I have a phone call that I've got to take. So I'm going to be back in a few minutes and we'll continue this. All right. Sorry. Hello?